Welcome to VLGA Connect. My name is Catherine Arndt and I'm the Chief of the VLGA Connect studio. I hope you enjoy today's Connect episode brought to you by the VLGA, the national broadcaster on all things local government.
And a very big hello and welcome to the VLGA Connect Governance Update, our weekly dissection of news that may or may not be closely related to what's happening in local government, and it's all brought to you by our terrific sponsors at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. And of course, to help with the dissection, it's the Chief Dissector, Steve Cooper. Hello.
Hello, Chris. I'm hoping that what we talk about is more fact than fiction.
Oh, well, yes, I would hope so. That should go without saying, shouldn't it, Stephen?
Well, it's a pity I just said it then.
We've got a bit to talk about. There's lots happening, mayoral elections, news at the councillor level, some integrity issues sort of more broadly around the country. Let's get into this. Long grass, wet weather, snakes, councils under the pump. You've seen some of that reporting.
I haven't seen a lot of reporting about snakes, Chris. I always just presume that in an emergency event like a flood or a fire, there will be a dislocation of wildlife, and it wouldn't be much different with the floods going on.
Well, and there's a perfect storm at the moment with all of this rain, and then we've had some humidity, and the grass is just growing. And I'm not sure there's any council in the state that is being able to keep up completely with that work, but it's certainly getting beyond a few, and they're putting out statements to explain, how hard they're working to try and keep on top of this and asking for patience, etc. Now, talking about the floods and the impact that that's had, I missed this, but I have heard about it, Steve. I know one of the mayors in a flood-affected area, I think were victim of a pretty unfair media circus. Can we call it a circus?
Oh, I'd call it an ambush. And we talked about, and I wouldn't dignify it, Chris, by putting it even the link on the show notes. People that want to find the interview by Carl Stefanovic with the former mayor of Campaspe, councillor Chrissy Weller, could go and Google it. These my thoughts of it, but I absolutely commend councillor Weller for her vain but and persistent efforts to get out her key messaging, which was for people to get their property above the floodwater as much as they could and then get out of the area. But Carl Stefanovic had other ideas. When
you say vain, I assume you mean in vain.
In vain, yes.
Vain.
Oh, no, I think councillor Weller is anything but vain. So, no.
Don't you love the English language, though? You do have to be careful sometimes.
Yes, there's an artery to plain speaking, Chris. Anyway, let's go. So, yes, Chris, for anyone that didn't see the interview, councillor Weller appeared and gave, the messaging, and then they brought on a local resident who was in the area. And some people might recall that there's been a temporary levy built in Echuca, which has, in the media's words, divided the town, but not covered the whole town. And can I say I offer no criticism of the resident. I think people, have every right to be angry and to be emotional, but that doesn't necessarily mean that at a time where emergency authorities are trying to get out important messaging, that it is the time to undermine that messaging with, I would have thought, really some errors of fact.
Yeah, as I say, I didn't see it. Someone did describe it to me. It sounded extremely unfair and sensational and a bit of tabloid.
Well, the overriding tenor was that these people had been deserted by the authorities and that the council should show compassion, that they should go down there and wrap their arms around these people, that the levy was put up with no consultation. Now, Chris, you grew up in the country, and I certainly did. And, where would, in terms of the provision of information, I think country people sort of know, where do you get information when there's an emergency on your doorstep?
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah, the council has that role in an emergency management environment. But, I would typically turn on my local radio, my local ABC radio, and that's where you get the information. It's in the nature of emergencies that there is not time for face-to-face communication, and there is not time for extensive consultation, particularly given that one of the things that would have happened, and Councillor Weller mentioned that the SES made the decision the SES get hydrology advice. And in the face of that hydrology advice, decisions are made. Now, are you going to expose the council and the community to liability because you don't take hydrology advice and you decide to do something else, or you delay the construction of a levee? Because my understanding, Chris, with levees is if they're not 100%, you may as well not build them.
Yeah.
A 99% levy is no good. The other thing is the gentleman said that there'd been plans for a levy in place since 1973, and the council typically have, given money to the port and to the tourism things rather than to the levy. Now, we understand that dynamic will occur in a lot of rural environments, but I would have thought a responsible media organisation might actually take that comment on notice and go and do some research. Like, for example, well, how many submissions during budget processes have there been for the construction of a levy? And given that Councillor Weller was quite surprised by the news, I'd say none.
Yeah.
So, Chrissy Weller also made the comment that there will be a time for review. I would hope there'll be at least a judicial review and probably a royal commission after this. And decisions will have been made that are not right. But I'd have to say, Chris, as I said at the outset, to undermine public messaging with that sort of gotcha moment, I think was just appalling.
I would have to agree based on the description, but I think you're being slightly unfair on the media, Steve, because it sounds to me like you're suggesting they should let facts get in the way of a good story. And
well, they know how to do it. When they have a concern, they contact the media office of the council and they get the facts. Well, clearly that wasn't something that particularly bothered the Today program. It was much easier just to run a sensationalist interview, which helps no one. Yeah.
So we're going to have to get used to these sorts of issues. And last night we did the COP26 1 Year on Global panel with some excellent presenters from around the globe, quite literally intercontinental it was. And, one of them made the point about local governments being in that precarious position, being exposed to litigation because decisions are going to get made in the face of emergencies. And I just read a report this morning, Steve, out of EcoWatch that a new study says 4 out of 5 cities around the world have faced significant climate hazards during 2022. So it's only a quarter of cities globally have not had a significant climate hazard to face this year.
Well, Lawrence Conway, the CEO of the South Lakeland Council at Kendal in the UK, made the comment too, and he had some really graphic photos of 4 1-in-100-year floods in the last 15 odd years, Chris.
Yeah.
And said that if our little community is having these events, what's going on worldwide? And it's at a time where every one of these events brings cost associated with restoration and recovery, but also cost association with mitigation and protection in advance of the next event, which is going to be more serious. So, these are major public policy issues. Sorry, I'm on a bit of a hobby horse that don't deserve superficial treatment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He made the point, we've got to stop talking about them as once-in-a-lifetime events. This whole 1-in-100-year flood thing is obviously completely outdated. I've heard 1 in 1,000 years being used recently, but I'm not sure that's helpful to even try and put that sort of number on it anymore.
Yeah, and there's something about the media cycle, and I think floods make it worse because normally, and we've talked about this before, Chris, you have a disaster and there's this sort of pattern with the media that isn't the disaster terrible, let's go and find some victims. And then at some point, who are we going to blame? But when we get into the blame game, while communities are still responding to the emergency, that's pretty difficult.
All right. So on that panel last night, it will be up on the VLGA Connect page in due course for members of the VLGA and the LGIU to access, and I certainly recommend it. They were some terrific speakers.
It was an outstanding panel discussion, Chris, with some real lived experience. Kieran Hayes, former CEO of Sligo in Ireland, is a serious thinker on this topic. Dr. Rosemary Collins at Blue Mountains, they've dealt with issues and have had to be both reactive and proactive.
Yeah.
You mentioned Lawrence Conway, and Darcy Pimblett was also excellent.
From the Cities Power Partnership. Special mention to Kieran Hayes. He was in Boston, where he's a Harvard Senior Fellow, and it was basically the window for the panel was 2 to 4 a.m. his time. So that's dedication.
That's above and beyond the call of duty.
Certainly was.
Give the man a Guinness, I think.
Certainly was. All right, let's get on to some of the latest updates coming out of local government around Victoria. Moira Shire Council continuing to make news. Steve, we talked last week about the minister just prior to the caretaker period having appointed a commission of inquiry. We can now report that the members of that commission are known. Francis O'Brien, Commissioner and Chair of the Commission of Inquiry. Francis was previously Chair of the Ararat Commission of Inquiry and a Commissioner for Geelong. So
Francis O'Brien, KC, I believe.
KC, yes. Yeah, KC, remind me, that's... of course, we've got to say King's Council now, don't we?
Or SC, if I think barristers get...
How silly I'll be. I was looking at the KC and thinking, is that a misprint? Because it's usually QC. Of course. And John Tanner, AM, is the other commissioner, known to many around the sector, former Brimbank administrator, former Ararat commissioner, former member of the Ministerial Panel of Local Government Rating System Review, and a long-term business community member in the Benalla region.
All I could say, Chris, is it's a panel on that commission with extensive experience at looking into local government. So we wait with interest. But something else has happened at Moira as well. Something
else has happened, and I'm not drawing a line between the two, but we understand that the mayor, Libero Mustica, the former mayor now, and another councillor, John Beitzel, resigned late last week. We'd heard a whisper, but we couldn't report it because it hadn't been confirmed, but it has been confirmed now. They have left the council. The mayoral election occurred this week. Peter Lawless, a long-term deputy, has been elevated to the position of mayor at Moira. So there's a lot going on in that part of the world.
There sure is. And I'm sure our listeners will be pleased to know that we have some scruples, Chris.
They may have wondered. All right.
Just in case.
Lots of other bits and pieces to work you through. The results of the Northern Grampians by-election for Karakara ward are expected today as we record this, Friday the 11th. So I'll report those results, assuming they do come out today, on the Roundup podcast on Sunday.
Look forward to that, Chris. And yes, presumably because it's just after 9 o'clock when we're recording this, the announcement will be made sort of at about 10:30. But anyway,
I'd say about 5 minutes after we hit the stop button.
Of course.
Another councillor is taking a leave of absence to run for state parliament. It's Councillor Clark Martin at Bayside Council. They've announced that he's taking a leave of absence just yesterday, in fact. And timing-wise, today, I believe the ballot draws for the districts and regions are occurring as well, according to a notice that's come out this morning from the VEC.
Well, then I understand the VEC already have the candidate lists on its website, and they're available. So that will be interesting, the ballot draws. And we'll have more information then about how many councillors are affected, presumably, Chris. But it would seem that Councillor Martin has followed the MAV guideline in terms of the timing of the taking of that leave of absence.
Yes, and as I think we've mentioned, there's some that have chosen not to or changed their policy to allow them to continue being councillors while they're also running for election, which is quite legal as well, apparently.
Next.
There's been a resignation at Wodonga. This happened while I was away. A countback has been scheduled for the 6th of December to fill the vacancy created due to the resignation of Councillor John Watson, not to be confused with the other John Watson, who is currently a monitor at Darebin. Councillor Watson served 3 consecutive terms on the council, was a mayor back in the early 2000s. Very sadly, the reason that he has resigned is he's recently been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and secondary liver cancer. So we send our best wishes to him and his family.
Absolutely best wishes to former Councillor Watson, definitely. Yeah.
The mayoral elections are continuing. I'm not going to read through them, Steve. There's too many. Some interesting results. If you go to the Local Government News Roundup website, there is a list that's being updated as those results come in. What I will say, after my very quick bit of arithmetic a few minutes ago, I believe we've had 38 results in so far this mayoral election season. 27 of those new mayors are men, and 11 are women. So in terms of trying to get that parity, which a lot of people are looking for, I think so far we're falling well short.
Yeah, that right back of the envelope calculation says about 70%. Please do your own calculations, but I think that doesn't need to be added to.
So if 38 have been conducted and we've got 79 councils, of which 2 are under administration, that means there's 77. So we're about halfway. So there's a few more to come.
There are, and props to you, Chris, the Local Government News Roundup website and that list are a go-to site at the moment. And I've tended to find it just by looking at your Twitter posts on that particular page.
I've got to say, lots of people are looking at it and the CEO appointment list as well, which I keep updated. Yeah, they're very, and from all around the country, mind you.
Oh, goodness. Now, is there news on the CEO appointment front?
There is news on the CEO appointment front, and I've made an update to that list. Someone who's very well known to us, Tammy Rose, the wonderful CEO at Yarra Ranges, is going to be the wonderful CEO at Yarra Ranges for another 5 years.
Chris, this is a recurring theme, and I shouldn't need to chide you, but I would have sort of presumed you would say Shepparton's own Tammy Rose.
Well, yes, but she wasn't Tammy Rose then. She was Tammy Madigan, if I remember rightly, and then she became Tammy Rose. It's a technical point. Shows you that we do have a connection that goes way back, and I was really chuffed.
You do indeed.
Really chuffed to see that.
Actually, my flippancy shouldn't diminish the achievement and the importance of that. I think well done to Tammy, and well done to the Yarra Ranges Council for making that contract extension.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Just wanted to note a few councils making some really challenging decisions at the moment, Steve, and perhaps it's a topic for another day, but we have talked about the process that councils and councillors go through when they make these sort of decisions. Greater Shepparton has made some decisions around January 26 and how it'll recognise that day and citizenship ceremonies and some advocacy positions. Warrnambool last week made a big decision, and it was a narrow vote to close the sale yards that have operated in that town for many years. The location has become increasingly unsuitable and its financial sustainability is under serious question. So there's quite a bit of controversy, I think, around that decision.
Chris, our urban listeners might not sort of be across the magnitude of that decision in terms of the implications for any rural community on sale yards, sale day, the economic boost to the town by having farmers come into the market and they spend other money, but also the costs associated with running a sale yard, the fact that yards are now privatised. It's a different market to what it was years ago when it was just a council service. It's a really complex issue that generates quite a bit of emotion.
You've surprised me with your depth of knowledge on the running of sale yards, Stephen.
Might have been one of my early roles at the former Shire of Swan Hill to wander around the sale yards occasionally, Chris.
There we go. And have you ever been involved with the management of an airport? Because that's another really curious one that a lot of councils have to deal with.
Indeed. And in fact, the licence agreement to allow a local farmer to put a crop in the part of the airport that wasn't the runway. All these things happen, Chris.
There's a story for another day, perhaps. All right. Keeping an eye on that one. Ballarat and Whitehorse, two of the councils very recently to announce they're likely to be exiting aged care services with the changes that are coming through the Commonwealth reforms. And again, those decisions are really challenging, and the way they get communicated to the community and the community's involvement in reaching those decisions is really important.
Absolutely. And look, we've talked about this before, Chris, that, one of the implications of rate capping is, councils having to make those decisions about staying in particular services or not.
A couple of quick ones for some extra credit reading if people are looking for something to look into. You've found an interesting circumstance that's happening in South Australia with the ICAC Commissioner there, Steve. What's that all about?
Not to do with local government, Chris, but I just thought a really interesting yarn that this week the ICAC Commissioner in South Australia, Anne Vanstone, released a statement. A man called John Hanlon was a public servant who it was alleged had effectively taken a holiday on the public purse. Following an ICAC South Australia investigation, the DPP in South Australia launched a prosecution, which it then discontinued. And the suggestion has been made that ICAC have in fact withheld information or evidence that was in support of Mr. Hanlon's position. I thought the interesting part was, well, two things. One was that the local government part, I guess, is that we're model litigants, and as a model litigant, you certainly wouldn't withhold information. I'm not saying that ICAC have done that, but as a model of, I guess, crisis communication, and Van Stone's statement is, I think, A1.
Okay, so we'll put the link up to that because it is, I think, as you say, a really good example of how to respond very quickly with a pending potential crisis. The Commissioner is coming back early from annual leave, is what I read into it, to take this very seriously and deal with it head on.
Yeah, she has, and she's basically said what she knows and said that she doesn't think there's anything in it, but launched a serious inquiry and demonstrated that anything untoward should be looked into, but also made the point about, which I think is a really important one that perhaps some of the media around Victoria could learn from, that there is a distinction between the role of the ICAC and the role of the DPP.
Okay, as I say, we'll put a link to the show notes in that, and we'll put a link up to a new report that's come out from the Royal Lifesaving Australia organisation, talking about challenging issues for councils. This new report into public pools has found that $8 billion is going to be required to replace 40% of public pools that are reaching the end of their functional lifespan by the end of this decade, and another $3 billion for those that are reaching the end of their lifespan by 2035. And interestingly, noting that 68% of all renewal or new aquatic facility construction in Australia is financed by local government. So this is a huge issue for the sector.
I think this one's been coming for a long time, Chris, because there are many communities where, you know, the local pool isn't financially viable. What some councils have been able to do, obviously, is to change the business model and put in a recreation centre with a gym and all of that sort of thing, contracted out. But the reality is they cost money, and there's a question for the community: how much do we want to pay for kids to be able to swim?
Yeah, that's right. Big questions that will need to be answered sooner rather than later. All right, Steve, that's the end of my list. Have you got anything else for us?
So I'm going to do something to you that you occasionally do to me, and that's an issue without notice. Can I just give a nod to the Myli organisation in Gippsland?
Yes, that's the library.
That's the library. They, in the last week or two, announced the appointment of 3 directors who are independent, sort of skills-based appointments. I am reminded because of that, Chris, that we are now 2 years into a 10-year period that regional library corporations have to corporatise. So and Myli were really quick out of the blocks, and that has now been 2 years. That would say to me, on that same model, that other, regional library corporations have got 6 years to really get started, because there's a couple of years involved in, really making sure that they're up and running. So remembering that the provisions of the 1989 Act relating to regional library corporations have been, is it grandfathered or sunsetted?
Yes. Good one.
They've got 10 years to do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. They will sunset.
They will sunset. That's it. They've been held over. Actually, Tony will come back and give us an explainer, I'm sure.
So, Steve, let me ask you, and perhaps Tony, a question without notice, and I may have asked this before. Why is this happening? What is the purpose of this new requirement on libraries?
I don't know what was in the mind of government when the Act was amended. My particular take, Chris, is I think there's a terrific opportunity for the management of regional library corporations to become skills-based, and for those boards to run the organisation, and for the council to change then the model of the relationship with councils, where councils' relationship with the library is one of representing the customers. And so the opportunity of separating them out, I think, is a really good one. Now, that may have created a furore, and we look forward to hearing some feedback next week.
Yeah, and I wonder whether whether that's a good enough reason when you balance that against the costs that are going to need to be incurred by councils to undergo this process. And I know a lot of them are thinking very carefully about how they're going to do this and fund it over the coming years.
I think, and a lot of really deep conversations, Chris, around what is the purpose of libraries? What do they add? And it's not a pejorative question. What, being really clear about what they add in terms of, the community development elements of the council plan, for example, and the various models that are available, noting that some councils have decorporatised and are going their own way. Some are doing shared services. Some are in a regional model. Yeah, there's a lot of water still to go under the bridge.
Okay, well, that went somewhere I wasn't expecting it to go. Thanks for introducing that, Steve. We always find something to talk about here on the Governance Update, and when we're in doubt, we put out a call to Tony Rownick at our sponsors, Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, to try and put us back on a straight path.
Well, Tony's got lots of homework for the coming week, Chris, I think, that we've given him.
So that's my way of thanking Hunt and Hunt Lawyers again for sponsoring the Governance Update here from VLGA Connect. And I thank you, Chief Dissector Steve Cooper, for your insights as always, and look forward to doing it again next week.
Thanks to you, Chris, and see you next week.
We'll see you soon on VLGA Connect. Bye for now.